Yes, please do. So, we're talking about Wakatobi in Indonesia. So this is a drone view of the resort, just to start things out, to give you kind of sense of the resort with the dock coming off the front of the main part of the resort, a lot of the bungalows along the side, and the house reef, which is quite fantastic right at the end of the dock. So as you're doing shore dives and all that, it's fantastically easy to get right to the wall. To zoom back out a little bit, not that way. Where in the world are we? So looking at where Wakatobi is relative to Southeast Asia, so you'll see it's off of the southeast side of Sulawesi Island. If we zoom in a little bit more, there's the Wakatobi National Park, and the resort itself is on a little island off of Tomea Island. So as you're getting there, the little local airport on the island was actually built by the resort. When they first established the resort in the early 90s, it took a couple days by boat to get out to the resort. So they petitioned the government to allow them to build a airport on their neighboring island. So as you're trying to get out there, as one of the questions we have already had kind of leading up to this, was the way to get there. So the way that I did is I did a direct flight from San Francisco to Singapore, then Singapore to Bali, and then the resort has a charter flight that they run a couple times a week between Bali and the airport on that neighboring island. That flight is kind of interesting as well because it's half cargo, half people. So the front half of the plane, regular passenger plane, they fill up with a lot of supplies and all that that are just needed by the resort and as well as people on the island. And then the other half of the seats are filled with people going out to the resort, as well as possibly some of the staff that are coming back from their time off.
Can you
So
book a flight? Can you book a flight there without a reservation?
I don't know if you can. All of the ones that I know about are through the resort, but I don't think there are other flights besides the charter that's operated by the resort, though they might allow you to book independent of a stay at the resort, but I don't know about that.
Well, it looks like there's other resorts on that island.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how those resorts get there. The only resort I know out there and that we stayed at was Wakatobi itself. This is the terminal that you arrive at, so it's a pretty big airport, as you can see. Then you load up on a bunch of the dive boats, and that's how they transfer you from that main island off to the little island that they are on. And you get welcomed with the fantastic view of the resort as you're coming in with the dock and the staff greeting you on the way in. A little bit about some of the bungalows and all that. So this is the accommodation that I was staying in. This was my little bungalow. And as you go onto the inside, it is quite beautifully well maintained. The resort is definitely a high-end luxury resort fully on its own, as well as being a phenomenal dive resort. All their amenities above water are fantastic. One of the things that they really like to boast is that all the water right out of any of the faucets is fully potable. So back in the early 2000s, they put in their own reverse osmosis filtering system. So any water that you get out of the tap there is fully potable. There's nothing to worry about. The resort itself was founded by a Swiss scientist about 30-something years ago. So he has done a lot of work to make sure that everything is absolute top-notch. So this looking out at the dive boats. So they have quite a few large boats. So this is just a few of them, though they have probably 3 or 4 more. If the resort was at full capacity, I think the capacity of the resort is somewhere around 60 to 70 people, but it was probably about half full while we were there. So a lot of the boats were mostly just us because they spread people out pretty well. Looking at the dive sites, so most of the area that we were diving were right around the resort or just kind of across the resort. And there's another island, Lintea, as well as kind of a shallow reef in the wall, kind of along either side. Though a couple of times we went out to the western edge of the area across from the resort, but that can be a little bit troublesome since it's a little bit wide open, so conditions have to be just right to get over there. So most of the time we're kind of in that channel between the resort and the neighboring island. As we get into the rest of the pictures, I shot a whole bunch of macro on this trip for reasons that I'll get into. So I figured I would start out with at least some wide angle of the little bit of wide angle that I did while I was there. So the reefs themselves were quite fantastic. The quality of the coral, the life in general, it was just phenomenal, dive after dive after dive. This one was interesting just because it looks like a face with a little red kind of hair sticking off of it. One of the things that I was really enjoying while I was there was finding things with patterns, which we'll get into even more. But the spotted stingrays were quite beautiful that we saw. We saw a few of them. There weren't a ton of them, but everyone we did see was quite nice. So the first set of things to talk about are the nudibranchs. So they are everywhere. We found so many different kinds of nudibranchs all over the place. Small ones, large ones, every shape, color, size. I'm not an expert in identification, so most of these I have no idea what the species is, but a lot of them were nicely posed as well. They were great photographic subjects from that perspective. Flatworms as well.
Were you using lighting on the wide angle shots?
Yes, everything I had was lit. Um, so these were a couple flatworms that were making more flatworms that we came upon. And this was just a few seconds, and I just happened to catch it right at the moment. And then shortly after, they just kind of went on their way.
How deep were you?
Most of the time between about probably 40 and 80 feet was the majority of it. There's a few locations where you can stay pretty shallow. On top of the house reef, there's a lot of really great shallow kind of eelgrass beds and things like that that I didn't get a chance to do on this dive or on this trip. But I heard from my friend Sad that had been on this trip before that there was one time where him and his friend just stayed in the shallows for about a 3-hour dive. So the shallows can be quite nice. And there's a few areas that do get quite deep up in the 90, 100 feet range, but I didn't spend too much time down there. And getting into the anemone fish, which these guys were a challenge, as many people know, as fast as they move. One of the things, or one of the main reasons that I was shooting so much macro on this trip is I had recently gotten the Olympus 90mm macro lens, which I really wanted to put to the test, and it actually worked out really nice for even some of these larger subjects that don't really like as you approach them too much. So for some of these larger ones that were a little bit more skittish, having a much longer working distance allowed them to actually relax a little bit more and actually get a lot more photos of them than I think I would have otherwise. So shooting macro or super macro, even for some of these bigger subjects, actually worked out really quite nicely. Now, it also didn't work out too nicely in other cases where we came across a lot of larger wildlife, some pretty big schools of fish, and turtles all over the place. I'll talk more on the turtles towards the end of the slides. So here we can see this is one that kind of got a little bit annoyed by me spending too much time with him, kind of telling me off. Absolutely little tiny anemone fish. This guy was minuscule and darting around all over the place. So I only got a few shots of him, and I loved in this case how small he was relative to all the anemone tentacles. The other thing that was really quite beautiful are the alligator fish or crocodile fish. I forget which one they are called. But the patterns on these are absolutely incredible, in particularly their eyes. Their camouflage is just absolutely wild, to the point where I was taking pictures of this larger one, and at some point the dive guide was pointing out, saying, "Hey, there's two." And then I realized off on the left side of him, there was a much smaller one that was hanging out there that I completely did not see for a solid few minutes while I was taking pictures of the larger one. But then as you kind of zoom in on their eyes, this is one of the reasons why I loved playing around with the macro. And even though these were quite large and I did not shoot much wide angle, so I didn't get too many of the full body shots, their eyes are just absolutely crazy. And they're really, really quite beautiful. So I have a lot of photos of their eyes from the trip.
Nice one.
Thank you. And then getting into the texture side of things. So this is where one of my main things that I was playing around with on this trip was textures, the corals, and the texture of the fish eyes and things like that was just absolutely incredible throughout the trip. So oftentimes I found myself looking at some of the most ordinary subjects and just enjoying finding the textures in them. So even like this like bubble coral. And your standard things as well. And the really, really fine texture on kind of the coral head around this fish was just something I really enjoyed. I just thought that looked fantastically cool. And same with the texture on this one, with the fish kind of perfectly centered in one of the features of the coral, and then just all that like neon iridescent texture all around it. Getting into a lot of the tiny little blennies and those types that I would enjoyed so much. As fast as some of these were moving, and a lot of them were tucked into little crevices and all that to get larger rigs in there would have been quite difficult. So having that extra working distance with that 90mm macro lens was a fantastic way to get some of these fish that were just in obnoxious places. One of the most annoying things to shoot, a black eel on a white background. Obviously, you can't see much of the texture of this face or anything like that, but you do see some of these periodically, and it was a frustrating one to try to light. Just getting into now some of the faces that I really enjoyed and kind of like the impressions. So while the stonefish are not necessarily the most beautiful of creatures, their faces are quite incredibly funny in my mind. Another kind of expressive fish. This one seemed to be a little bit frustrated with me and my presence around him. The amount of these little guys that I have photos of from this trip is just mind-boggling. I spent so much time with each one that I found. The dive guide was used to kind of showing people the larger things, and oftentimes would be schools of fish or turtles or even some larger cuttlefish and other just big things, or even somewhat big things. And oftentimes I would just make a little like, nope, sorry, just looking for the little tiny stuff. And then eventually after a few dives, she kind of got it. And then like, she would see something big, point at me, and this kind of like chuckle of like, hey, look at this awesome gigantic thing that's going by, and there's nothing that you can really do to take a picture of it because you are only shooting super macro. So my dive buddies had a lot of enjoyment on the trip because they saw a lot of large creatures that I got purely crap photos of.
Mackenzie, it looks like he's out of a Dr. Seuss book.
Often they do have that kind of face, which is why I kind of really spent a lot of time with these little guys because they just, I don't know, I love the faces of them. They just always make me smile.
Did you bring a fisheye?
I did. I did have my 8mm fisheye, and that's what like I used on I think a grand total of 3 dives out of the trip, maybe 4 dives.
Oh no.
Yeah. Um,
That's a
the last
commitment to
dive-
macro.
Oh yeah, it was a commitment, and mistakes were made, I'll put it that way. Well, then some of these little crabs that are just tucked into little coral heads were just absolutely fantastic to look at. I love their eyes, and like the antenna sticking off of them. It's just, they're incredibly cool animals. So now getting into some of really why we came there was for a few of the very specific creatures. So the leaf scorpion fish, the camouflage of these guys are also wild. There were so many times where we just could not see them until the guide was literally like nearly poking it in the face of like, hey, this is where it is. Then once you see it and your eyes adapt a little bit, they weren't so difficult. But there were a few of these that were in pretty obnoxious locations as well. And I think this was actually particularly one of them. That it was also in kind of like somewhat of a swarm of lionfish around it. And then shortly after shooting it for a couple minutes, I realized there was also a green moray eel that was quite large, kind of like right below me, and I was almost on top of him. And there was something else as well right nearby. There's like, oh, there's a lot of potentially painful creatures around. Fortunately, none of them did anything to us. And then this like cool purple one as well that we came across. So one of my few turtle pictures from the entire trip. And this was on the very first dive. We were doing effectively our checkout dive just to get settled in. And we came across this guy within a few minutes of diving the house reef. And he was just hanging out kind of on this little ledge right on the wall and just was absolutely perfectly posed. And I was like, I'm sure we'll see plenty more of the course of the trip, and I'll have my wide angle lens on for a good portion of the trip, so I'll get more pictures. So I didn't spend a whole bunch of time with this guy. I was like, oh, let's just get settled in and kind of take this dive easy. And certainly enough, we did see plenty more turtles. On probably most dives, we saw a turtle or two. And on the very last dive of the trip, we did the house reef again, or effectively finished on the house reef. We started a little bit north of the dock and then kind of drifted onto the house reef. And we saw a turtle here, a turtle there. And for the first 5 or 6 turtles, we were pretty excited. Once it got to about 10 turtles, 12 turtles, we're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like they're just kind of all over the place right now. And I think we got upwards of about like 17 or 20 turtles on a single dive along the house reef. And my dive buddies and the guides were absolutely hysterically laughing at me, having brought my macro lens on that dive. And there was just turtle after turtle after turtle after turtle. And it was like, well, I guess I just get to sit back and look and enjoy them. Even my friends that did have a wide angle, even after probably about 12 or 13 turtles, they would start just looking at the turtle and just kind of enjoy it and kind of let it go by. And even they weren't really going after the turtles anymore. So that was probably the one of more frustrating dives of the day or the trip with how many turtles there were and being set up for super macro. This was one of the times where the choices I made definitely came back to bite me in the butt, and I should have put my wide angle lens on a bit more than I did. Another one, this cuttlefish was absolutely gigantic. And the best I could do was effectively take a telephoto picture of it from about 20 feet away and then white balance the crap out of it in post to even get any sensible image out of it. And this was one, again, where my dive buddies were just absolutely laughing at me not having my wide angle lens on yet again. And then there was a little pygmy cuttlefish. So this was one that we came across. And while the background and the color and all that is nothing spectacular, this is one I was quite a bit happier with actually having a lens on that I could get the little pygmy cuttlefish with in a reasonable way, even if it's not the most fantastic of photos. It was a very expressive little guy that just kind of hung out for a while. Another one where my frustration was getting the better of me on several of the dives was the pygmy seahorses. Shooting the 90 was fantastic for these in many ways, but it seemed where oftentimes where these were also on what ended up being drift dives. So kicking and trying to get them. This was the only one where I got to even a semblance of a not too painful of an image, even though the seahorse itself was completely out of focus. But we saw quite a few of them. There was probably 6 or so dives that we saw them on, maybe 4 dives, somewhere in that range of things. The guides were fantastic at finding them. There was even one coral that had probably maybe counted 3 on there at once, and there was 2 that were even potentially able to get them in the same frame if you could have got yourself positioned just right, which I was not able to. And the main thing that I was looking for while I was there was Sean the sheep. And after one of our first dives, we came up and the other group that was on the boat with us came up like, oh, we saw one, like the dive guide found it like fantastically, like so excited. And I was like, and then I went to my dive guide and I was giving her a hard time, like, hey, I've been wanting to see these. Like, how come you haven't found one for me? And then she's like, okay, I got the marching orders. We'll get you one. And on the very next dive, I see her looking at something. She pauses, writes on her slate and turns it at me and just was like, as you requested. And it wasn't until like I could actually see on the back of my camera that it was what I thought it was. I knew exactly what it was when she said, as you requested on her slate. But it was absolutely ridiculously tiny. And I got a few shots of the little guy. But this was the one that I was so happy I did have my 90mm on because it made lighting easy. It made getting into the little crevice where it was nice and easy. All the magnification I ever could have wanted to get this. So this was effectively the exact reason why I got the 90 and our dive guide delivered perfectly. Unfortunately, I think we only saw one other on the trip and I didn't get much for photos of that one. So, but I was so happy to have gotten it anyways because this was one of the main things I wanted to see while I was there. And a little bit of the topside stuff. So at the very end of the dock is a little hut, which is their kind of happy hour bar. So every evening around, I think it's like 5 to 6 or 5 to 7, they do happy hour out at the end of the dock and you just get to hang out there. And one of the nights stayed out a bit later and there was this nice thunderstorm that came by. So playing with some topside photography as well. And the sunsets from the dock are just absolutely gorgeous. So 100% wonderful trip. Can't recommend it enough. The resort staff there is absolutely phenomenal. The service that you get is just mind-blowing. Within about a day or so, all of the staff know everyone by name and they call you by name and anything you could ever ask for, they're there to help you. And even like carrying gear around and all that, they just do a fantastic job and you don't have to lift a finger pretty much the entire trip. Even I'd be like walking out with like a towel or something like that to go to the dive boat and they would like grab the towel from me to like carry it out for that. So The staff, 100% top notch. The food is absolutely mind-blowingly good. And the diving is just phenomenal. There is some trash in the water, just be aware of that. It's not, you'll see trash on most dives, but it's still absolutely fantastic diving. It is beautiful area. So that is what I've got.
Can you go back to the dive map you had, like on slide 3 or 4? The dive site map at the very start. And while you're doing that, so how many days did you spend there diving? Yeah, there you go. That's the map.
I think it was, we were at the resort for 10 days.
Mhm. So you talked a lot about like how I think you intended to use, well, so actually the question I had with regard to this, could you talk about what your favorite dive sites were and how the type of diving differed depending on where you were, like which areas you were in?
Yep. A lot of the dives were fairly similar wall type dives,
Yeah.
particularly along kind of this wall that's opposite the resort. There's a lot of like in
Mhm.
and out nooks and crannies.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily one solid wall, but it kind of like goes in and out, in and out, in and out.
Mhm.
Versus along more the resort was more of just kind of like a solid wall with little protection.
Mhm.
But that side was also quite a bit calmer. It seemed like a lot
Mhm.
more of the drift dives happened more along that opposite wall from the
Mhm.
resort.
Mhm.
Uh, one of the dives that we did that was absolutely by far one of our favorites was called the Zoo. And that was
Mhm.
one of the first dives we did, and the sea life at that location was phenomenal. It's fairly deep to start out. Not to start out, but there's kind of like a sand bottom that's probably around 80 or 90 feet, and then kind of like a curved, almost like amphitheater type kind of reefscape on the side that's kind of like slopes up into the shallow. So you have kind of like a nice, it's not a complete vertical wall, it's not super flat and shallow, but a nice kind of taper going up into the shallows. And that
Mhm.
is one where we just saw so much life. Um, a lot of turtles, a lot of the cuttlefish, a lot of um, what else was there? There's I think that's one of the locations where we did a night dive that was also fantastic. Similarly, um the across from the zoo, which is kind of just southeast of the resort, so even further southeast, just kind of on the edge of that Lintea Island was Tuluk Inda. That I forget exactly which that one was like, but that I remember that being one of our favorite locations to go to, and we went to it a few times. So those two were probably our favorite locations kind of to go
Was
to.
any of the diving challenging
Um,
in terms of
there were
currents or other things?
Just a mess.
to some degree, but not too bad. It's definitely one where it's like, yep, you're definitely going with the current, and
Mhm.
on those ones there was usually some like a fair amount of nooks and crannies to like get in behind. So
Mm.
uh, if you were out kind of more in the channel, yep, it was ripping pretty good a couple times. But for the most part, you could duck into some kind of sheltered areas pretty easily, um, and kind of hang around for a while. But it seemed like the most of the sites ended up being drift dives. A few of them were pretty stationary, but
Mhm.
a lot were drift dives.
So I understand why people who, go to muck diving would do macro like the whole week. But in this case, I mean, this is really known for like awesome reefs and wide angle. So why did you end up deciding to use the macro over the wide angle most of the time? Was it just because it was a new lens and you were experimenting with it, or were there other reasons as well?
The new lens was one of the biggest factors.
Yeah.
But between Shaun the sheep, the pygmy seahorses, a
Mm,
lot of the little tiny blennies, and
mm-hmm,
gobies were the things that I
mm-hmm,
was just really after.
mm,
I really wanted to have that lens on for those.
Mhm.
and I definitely should have put my wide angle lens on more than I did.
But you could have
Um,
gotten a lot of really good wide angle shots if you had had that lens on, right?
Oh, absolutely. The wide angle is just fantastic.
Okay.
There were so many locations where just the reefscapes were just absolutely beautiful. Some of the days that I was going to shoot wide angle, we're going to some sites where they're like, yeah, the wide angle will be pretty nice here. It ended up being somewhat cloudy days, so like the lighting wasn't that great. So it's like, well,
Mm,
I'll put my macro lens on just because, well, I don't have the nice natural light anyways.
no.
Um, And then on some of the days where they were like, yep, this is definitely a macro site, put that on. Those were also some of the days where it seemed like the weather was really nice and I kind of wished I had my wide angle lens on.
Mm,
So it's kind of a
yeah.
mix of, but you easily could have left your wide angle lens on the entire time and been quite happy.
Okay. Last question I had was, how did the quality of the shore diving on the house reef compare to the quality of the boat diving that they took you to?
Oh, the house reef is by far one of the best house reefs I've been to. It is a phenomenal house reef. You could have just been dive after dive after dive on that. And it's so easy to
Mhm.
get to. So as we go and we look at kind of the back
Mhm. Yeah.
view of the kind of the dock. So right before you hit the little kind of happy hour shack is the stairs to get into the water. So you just go there and it's like a 20-foot swim to the edge of the wall. And then you just have the full length of the wall that you can go. You can come up into the shallows. They have boats to come pick you up. So there's a security guard that's at the end of the dock 24/7. And part of that is to also keep an eye on the divers that go out on the house reef. So when you're done, you can basically just pop up. He's keeping an eye on you, sees that you've popped up, and pretty quickly he'll send the boat over to come get you. So the house reef is a phenomenal place to go diving. I wish I did the house reef more than I did, but didn't get on it except probably maybe 3 or 4 times, but I easily could have
Okay.
done it twice as
Okay.
much.
Cool. All right. I know there were other people who were thinking of visiting. Are there any questions from them?
Yeah, go ahead, honey.
What time of year did you go?
March of this year, so just a few months ago.
How was the weather?
It was pretty good most of the time. There are storms that roll through most nights. I am luckily a pretty heavy sleeper, so I was able to sleep through most of them. My friends that I was with, some of them are much lighter sleepers and were kind of like up with the thunder and lightning that was happening. There was one night towards the end of the trip that was an absolute slammer of a storm. It was just right on top of us in thunder and lightning for a solid 4 or 5 hours. And it was wild. Even the next morning, we woke up at probably around 6 or so, and the storm was still extremely strong. And we went to breakfast, and on our way to breakfast, we were stopping at the dive shop and being like, "Hey, are we going out today? Because like it's pretty intense." And they're like, "Oh, it'll be fine in a couple hours. We'll be ready to go by probably 8:30." And I was just like, there's no way in hell that's gonna happen. But well, it's what they say. So I guess I'll get ready. And sure enough, right around like 8:15, 8:30, the storm just completely went away and it was a normal perfect day. So during the day, the weather was quite nice. It is quite hot even at that time of year. Um, Whenever you're right on the beach, it's pretty nice. The bungalow that I was in was a little bit off the beach, and there was even a significant temperature difference, probably 40, 50 feet off the beach. So it is toasty and
Good to
quite
know.
humid.
How many dives did you do a day?
It was 3 to 4 dives a day, so 2 in the morning and then go out at least once in the afternoon, sometimes twice, and they do a night dive. I think we did 2 night dives as well. And you can also go out on the house roof as much as you want. So you can just grab some tanks and just go on out.
Nice.
What were
the-
the boats like?
What was that, Helga?
What were the bugs like?
The bugs,
Yeah. Mosquitoes?
I didn't have any problem with mosquitoes or any types of bugs the entire time I was there. I did bring bug spray just because being tropical and all that, I'm like, oh, I'll have it. And I didn't have to use it a single day while I was there. They weren't bad at all.
Yeah, early spring is a good
You have
time.
to get visas.
Oh yeah, do you need a visa to go through Bali?
Yep, you do need a visa because Indonesia does require it for US citizens. It's pretty easy to do as an e-visa now. You just apply online like a few weeks before you leave. And it's just effectively like instantaneous approval, and then you just print it out and you bring that with you as you go through immigration. It's a pretty seamless process.
Yep.
From that perspective.
Cool.
And Wakatobi does have kind of links to the visa process and all that on their website, I believe. And they give you kind of like a travel document ahead of time that kind of gives you an overview of everything you need to do. And that also specifically did have the links in it to say, hey, this is how you go get the visa that you're going to need and all that. They do a pretty good job with the logistics side of things and giving you that information.
And if you forget to do it in advance, you can do it on arrival when you get to Bali or wherever.
Yes,
Okay.
you can do that too.
Did you have to have any special shots to go there?
I did not. I don't think there was anything they specifically recommended even, other than kind of just the normal kind of precautions as you're going to a tropical location, but nothing outright required. If you are, well, to get there, you do pretty much have to go through Bali to get out to the resort anyways, but if you do spend a couple days kind of before or after the trip, there's a bunch of fantastic things to do on the island as well. My friend's parents had a contact as a driver that they've used several times over the past kind of 10 or 12 years. And the driver was absolutely phenomenal. If anyone's going there and they want to do some touring around Bali kind of above water ahead of time, I can highly recommend this guy. We can get you his contact information. He is absolutely phenomenal.
Great.
He knows a ton of stuff, and he's just a fantastic person to ride around with.
Great. How do we get in touch with you to make sure that we find him?
So let's see. I'll put my email in the chat so you can
Okay.
do that. Let me get out of full screen mode so I can see things.
Were there rains associated with those storms?
Oh yeah, there were some pretty heavy rains. Most of the nights. In the evenings as well, we were get some. But those were usually fairly quick passing if they did come through. But the ones at night, those storms were pretty intense at times.
Did you see other divers at the airport that did not end up at your resort?
No, all the ones that were on our flight are all the ones that are just on the full charter flight from the resort itself. So everyone there is going to the resort.
What did you fly in from the States to Bali?
So for me, I did San Francisco to Singapore, and then I did an overnight in Singapore because the connections were going to be a bit tight, so I didn't want to chance it too much.
Yep.
And then Singapore to Bali.
Did you do Singapore Air or what worked?
Oh, I did United between San Francisco and Singapore, and then Singapore Air from Singapore to Bali.
There are no direct flights to Bali, right, from SFO?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, there's no direct flights to Indonesia from the US.
You can also go through Taiwan
Oh,
or,
yeah.
or among
Yeah.
other places. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
So any,
Or you can fly to Sydney and pretend to be an Australian and go to Bali.
and then
Right.
take Virgin Atlantic. Yeah. What was the question I was just going to ask him? Shoot. Sorry, it slipped my mind.
Of course.
Oh, big animals. I'm a big fan of seeing the big animals. Where do you see those?
We'll
When
just on all the dives.
You just on the boat dives, right? They get out into the channel and there are big animals passing through.
For the most part, the biggest animals we saw were the turtles and kind of some big schools of fish.
Mhm.
I forgot what we saw for one of the schools of fish, but there were some pretty monster fish. That was about the majority of the big animals. We didn't see any like sharks or any of that coming through. No whale sharks, nothing like that. I don't know if there is a season for those as well, if they do come through other times of the year.
Yep.
But the big animals were by far mostly the turtles that we really saw.
Okay.
But the reefs in general, really healthy and wonderful to see, huh?
Oh, absolutely. The reefs were gorgeous.
Nice.
Hey, Mackenzie, I got something I'd like to share. That is, at Wakatobi, if you take their liveaboard, it's the pelagic, they will take you to a site called Asphalt Pier, and it's a working pier, and it's kind of made of up of a bunch of junk, big concrete blocks and stuff. But what they have there, they have mandarin fish. And you know how typically you're fighting to get a picture of a mandarin fish hidden back in there. These guys are totally out in the open. And it's
I heard that from them. So the Pelagian, their liveaboard was in dry dock for kind of like the winter. And just as we were leaving, they were pulling it out of dry dock and they brought it by literally the morning as we were flying out. So we could at least do a quick tour of the boat. And they were talking about specifically, yeah, that dive where they're just like, we'll go to the site and like, if you ever want to see mandarin fish, you will be guaranteed to see one on this dive.
Yeah. They come out as the light is fading. Again, I kind of blew it because by the time the mandarin fish came out, my video lights were, you know, halfway worn out, and so I didn't have good lighting until the color isn't good. But it's an amazing sight to go see. Yeah, and Wakatobi, there's another thing too. I went there in the early days, and I've been there 2-3 times, but was when the airplanes first started flying in, and the local villagers were really excited to see the airplane. And every time the airplane came into the island, they put on their best clothes and they all went over to the airport and they lined the whole area there watching the Westerners come in. Yeah.
Yeah, because we even get to talk to the owner of the resort while we were there. We were talking about it, and he was like, "Yeah." As we were trying to find like the location where to go, and we even asked him, "It's like, how the hell did you end up here, out in the absolute middle of nowhere?"
Yeah.
And he was just like, "Well, I looked at kind of the layout of the Coral Triangle and looking at kind of Sulawesi Island and knowing that's one of the most biodiverse areas above water, and just kind of like pinpointed a few islands out in basically the middle of nowhere, looking at kind of ocean charts to figure out what like the reefscapes could have been like." And he's like, "Hey, yep, this is where we ended up." And when we first came out here, he's like, I was basically the first white person they saw after the Dutch kind of left the island from a colonial standpoint. And they were not too trustworthy with him at the start, but then he's turned into being a kind of like a phenomenal like resource for the locals. And he does as much as he possibly can for the locals. Any possible way that he can figure out a way to hire someone locally from the island, he 100% does it. So even like all the thatched roofing on the kind of like the bungalows and on the resort itself, he's like, yeah, I could put like long-term, nice, stable roofing on there that never needs to be changed out, but these need to be changed out every few years. So that's job security for the locals. So he puts a lot of thought and effort into how can he be a good part of the local community and all that, and really do what he can for them, which is one of the things that I think has made the resort so successful and like so phenomenal to be there, because all the people that work there just are fantastic to everyone.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
What was the food like?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's all buffet style. So they have a mix of kind of normal Western food most of the time as well, but then also kind of local dishes of various kinds. One of the things that you'll be very surprised by there is their bread. So the owner is Swiss originally, and he puts a high bar on the quality of how the bread needs to be. The like donuts and the pastries and all that are phenomenal. Um, I ate more of those than I care to admit throughout the trip for breakfast. Um, he's done a fantastic job with the food. Even if there's stuff that kind of like you want, but they don't necessarily have it that day or anything, or you want him to make it again, you can talk with like the chef and all that, and he'll gladly make things again and all that. Obviously, they're somewhat limited on kind of what they have on the island for supplies because they basically just have their charter flight a couple times a week. So they can't always do things, but they'll certainly try as hard as they can to make your requests if there's things you want.
If you could only use one lens there in 35mm format, what would it be, or focal length?
I really like super macro. I really enjoyed that. So I was using my 90 on an Olympus 4/3, so that's effectively like a 180 equivalent. So it is quite super macro from that standpoint. And outside of beating myself up on those dives where there were lots of turtles and lots of big critters going by, when I wished I had my wide angle, I was never upset about only having my super macro on. I really enjoyed it. I love the critter hunts. I love having my head in the reef. So that's the stuff that I really enjoy. But
Well,
I
how many
probably would have been equal.
millimeters is your wide angle choice?
My wide angle that I have is an 8mm. And it's an 8mm fisheye, so it's like 180-degree field of view. Is that right, Paul? I know you've got the same lens.
Yeah, I think it's 180.
Yeah. So it's very wide. And I would have been perfectly happy with that on the entire trip as well. Like the reefscapes are fantastic. I just really love super macro. I find that to be a lot of fun. And I just get super frustrated lighting wide angle. I'm really good at getting backscatter in my wide angle shots. So
Pull him back, pull him back. I will say, David, I think if you ask other people who didn't have a brand new 90mm, they might say that if they were going to choose one lens for that part of the world, it would probably be a fisheye.
I
Okay.
would agree with that.
Makes sense.
On-
Yeah, makes sense.
On Maui, I was using a GoPro 12 shooting 4K video because I was snorkeling and can't hold my breath that long.
Yep.
And then I got screen grabs and I was disappointed because it was only like 2.5 megabytes instead of the normal, 12 or 20. So anyway, has anyone heard anything good about iPhone camera cases? Sea Life has one,
This
but
does not sound, I'm sorry, but that does not sound like a quick answer. I am looking at the time also, and
Yeah, we should get over to Bob.
do we want to push the second presentation to a future month, or do we want to proceed?
It's up to you, Bob, if you want.
It's up to you guys. Yeah. Mine's probably a half an hour, so I don't want to, have the meeting run too long, but it's up to you guys.
No, we'd love to see it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Let's go for it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Yep.
agree.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry,
thank you so
David.
much
Yeah.
for the Wakatobi presentation.
Yeah, that was great. Okay. Let's see here. So, yeah, we had presenter that so I'm helping, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the vice president. Mackenzie's the president of NCUPS, and you can see this okay, my title slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's coming through.
So Mackenzie and Paul and I, we had a presenter we were, hoping would be able to present this month. And so we ended up organizing this on fairly short notice. And so, but had some ideas. And so what I'm going to present is not a typical presentation. It's not going to have lots of underwater photos. I do have some. I haven't worked them up a lot. It's only been a couple months since I was there. This is more about the process of choosing where do you want to go and specifically what resort. And I'm hoping it's not just my advice. I'm hoping it's a conversation and we can get some other best practices from a lot of the other people in the club and get a conversation going when I finish the presentation. So I guess subtitle could be Mackenzie suggested engineering a dive trip for your family, or how to avoid the cattle boat diving would be another subtitle, another potential title. And so so this is a trip that we did for my son's spring break from UC Santa Barbara between the winter and spring quarters at the end of March this year. And so I've been diving I've been certified for 37 years, used to be the president of the McDonnell Douglas Scuba Club in St. Louis, Missouri. So I learned diving in mud hole diving. So I've seen some really bad diving, but unfortunately, some of the diving I did in Fiji was some of the worst tropical diving, which of course is still much better than mud hole diving. But so this is my dive map. I've been on many different dive destinations, about a dozen different ones, picked out dive resorts, used undercurrents and other pre-social media platforms. And until this time, I've avoided cattle boat diving. This is the first time I've ever fallen victim to that. And that was part of my motivation for making this talk. So my wife and I were both enthusiastic divers before we met. We kind of took a hiatus when my son was growing up and school age. We didn't get a lot of opportunity. And then we've done a little bit more recently. My son was certified a couple of years ago in the end of 2022, and essentially was saying, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to use my C card," and that was what motivated the search. I started out looking at Cozumel, Kona, Philippines, and Fiji. And low transit time was a key criterion. Like we couldn't afford the 40 hours or a couple days to get to Wakatobi. Not that, I think we would have gone someplace that far away, for his, we didn't need to go to the very best diving, our first, the very first, tropical trip he's done. So I started doing some research, maybe spent a couple hours, realized it could take 10 to 30 hours to really pick like what's the best resort. So I thought, okay, let's try to speed this up by getting that dive travel agent involved. And I don't mind paying some, consulting fees if it had saved me hours of work. And so this is what I sent her in terms of, these are my requests. I want hotel rooms with AC. One ideally would like a bungalow with 2 separate rooms, which fortunately is easy to find in Fiji. I want, clear water. I don't want a lot of like runoff from a big island nearby. Good coral, good fish life. I'm not looking for muck diving. Good beach diving is a plus. And then my son is susceptible to seasickness, wanted relatively stable boats or sheltered waters. You know, so I'm not interested in shark diving, which is a big big thing in Benga Lagoon in Fiji, for example. And so she immediately narrowed it down to 2 resorts, Voli Voli, which is on the north shore of the main island, and I'll show you some maps, and then the one that we stayed at, south end of Tavioni. And so I was a little bit surprised that really, there's like 100 resorts. You're gonna narrow it down to 2 just based on this alone. That seemed a little implausible. But we talked on the phone. She was very confident. Yes, it's only 2. So read up on both. One of my concerns with the first one, Voli Voli, was, and I'll show you the map again. I did read some reviews where it seemed like there was some chance of being blocked from the best diving, you know, under storms, and it seemed like the one on Tavioni was a little bit more reliable. So I ended up quickly skimmed the resorts, saw a lot of positive stuff, and you know, then just started booking it and made all the necessary travel arrangements. And so we were kind of locked in. This was by the end of January, and in the meantime, as a little aside, started looking at a new camera system for. My wife has gotten more interested in this, and we've been using this GoPro with the flip filters, and it's kind of complicated if you're using external lights, because then you know we also have a flip filter on the strobe, which is a real pain. So started looking for to get a second system, and a lot of the newer action cameras have auto white balancing, and so here's, you know, I compared the the Hero 12, the DJI Osmo Action 4. These all look like, you know, very similar. Um, and of course, I've used some more expensive systems, but I was not willing to spend, you know, $10,000 and up. So ended up buying this camera. It worked pretty well for us. My wife enjoyed using it, so that was another kind of you know, part of the whole vacation planning process. And then you know, came time, so that we got that in the mail, you know, by the start of March. And then came time to travel. And for those of you who don't know where Fiji is, and I realize it's been a long time since we've had, it'd be good to get like a speaker who's a real expert on Fiji and not just myself to address it. Historically, it's been one of the more accessible tropical locations, and that's partly because they have a state-funded airline, and they've, you know, the purpose of the airline is not to make a profit, it's to keep to fill the resorts on the island and make for a healthy tourist infrastructure. And so they have round trips, including nonstops from SFO, for as little as $700. So that'll get you to their main island, and then if you need to, like we did, you can take these little puddle jumper flights for a few $100s more to your final destination. But the thing that I thought was great was it was under 20 hours door to door, which is very competitive for tropical dive destination. And really there aren't too many you can get to faster than that. You know, you basically go to Hawaii and then kind of keep going the same direction, but about twice the distance. So you end up about 17 degrees south of the equator and just north of New Zealand. It's about a 3-hour flight from the North Island of New Zealand, like Auckland. So when should you go? This is actually very important. So we went there at the end of March, which is, let's see. Oh, this is too bad. The some of these, let me jump out of this view. So if you look at like the, let me just delete this and I'll go back to full screen here. So if you look at how much rain they get about 3 times as much rain in March as they do in our summer months. And so the week we were told the week before we got there that the visibility was only like 20 feet or something on the reef due to runoff. So we at least avoided that. But like one of the days we only had 30 or 40 foot visibility, which was, you know, amazingly bad for tropical diving. So, and it was kind of hot and humid. So their high season is our summer months, which is their winter. And so typically, you know, June, July, August into September, these are considered the best months for scuba diving. And so the resorts will be more booked up. You will pay higher airfares. You will pay higher, but I think it's worth it. This is, I would strongly recommend for people. And if you hear the dive guides talking about it, the water visibility is better. It's more comfortable topside. So there's a lot to recommend about going this time of year. They also made a claim that it was, better to go at like a quarter moon or 3/4 of a moon. I looked at the tide tables. It doesn't seem like it's a huge difference to me. So let me talk a little bit about the where to go, right? So you fly in to this place called Nandi on V2 Levu, which is their biggest island, and then you can either take flights to the other islands that are neighboring, or there are a number of resorts you can directly access to V2 Levu, and so one of them is like a 2-hour drive where you go around the island and you go up to the city Reiki, and so there's a resort called Voli Voli, and this was one of the two choices that was presented to us. And then from there you get on a boat and you do, if weather permits and it's not too rough, you do a 1-hour boat ride out kind of halfway between V2 Levu, which is the biggest island, and Vanu Levu, which is the second biggest island, and you dive. There are these reef structures that kind of poke up, and there's a marine park, a marine reserve, and so this is where they would try to go every day that the weather permitted. And I was told even if you didn't get there, that the diving was still all very, very good. They only got there about half the days. The one person that I talked to went there. So the other choice that we were presented with was Tavioni, which is of course very famous for its diving. And so Tavioni is the third largest island in Fiji. It takes like, our resort was down near the south end, took, I don't know, a little over an hour to drive down there, probably 20 or 30 miles. Um, and so they had this reef called Vuna Reef that's down at the very, very tip. But then the other choice is this reef called Rainbow Reef that's really closer to Vanu Levu, and right across the way from Taveuni. Um, so, but so Vuna Reef used to be, I talked to some old timers and they were saying used to be considered the best, had everything, huge sea fans, coral, fish, but everybody loved it. But coral bleaching, they've had multiple instances of bleaching in the last 20 years, agricultural runoff, fishing by the Chinese, harvesting have all taken their tolls. And then the final blow was in 2016. The cyclone Winston hit and pretty much wiped the reef clean, and just nothing but bare rock there. So there were a couple of good dives I did down here, but there were others that were the worst tropical diving I've ever seen, and I have some photographic examples of that a little bit later. It was a much shorter boat ride, so I mean that was incentive for them to do it, but mostly pretty disappointing. Um, so so if you look at Taveuni overall, Taveuni has many, many resorts that are more toward the middle of the island. They also have some that are up at the north end, and most of them are going to access Rainbow Reef, which is here between Vanu Levu and Taveuni, Vanu Levu being the second biggest island. And so there are a number of resorts like Sao Bay and a few others that are in here. Some of them are very close. Or Dive Academy is another one. These are just like a 2 to 5 minute boat ride. Some of these are going to be relatively short, 20-minute boat rides. My wife stayed at one up here before. Ours, unfortunately, it was about an hour boat ride with, we had boats that were not particularly fast from the south end. So, and so the current is an issue as well. You have, incoming and outgoing currents that are kind of going through here, and some of them can be very, very strong. And so my wife had dove Taveuni 28 years ago. Rainbow Reef was known for, strong currents and brilliant soft coral, and the currents were part of what made the soft coral healthy. So this is a picture I grabbed of people swimming for their life in very strong currents. And I was a little bit concerned because our son was a relatively new diver and certainly very fit. But turned out we never got to dive those spots. And basically, you know, we had some 70 and 80-year-old divers on our boat that, you know, frankly, were not capable of swimming more than maybe a 1 knot speed at the most. So anything like this would be absolutely out of the question. So they owned 2 boats. There was a large twin-hulled boat that held 26 divers, and then a smaller single-hulled boat that held 9 divers. And you know, the only people who used the smaller boat were either there was a dive club the first couple days that chartered the small boat, and then you know, the remaining divers had to. We also had they sent away the big boat for some service, and then the 15 divers that were remaining had to share the small boat. And it wasn't really cost effective for the owner to rent a backup boat, apparently. So that was when we were mainly diving Buna Reef. The remainder of the time, all the divers would use the large twin-hulled boat for every dive. And so, you know, I would ask about, there were a number of very famous dive sites, and I'd ask about, well, when are we going to get to dive these? And they're like, well, you know, we'll see the condition, and, you know, we'll let you know when it's, you know. And the reality was, you know, the conditions were optimal pretty much the entire week with calm waters, predictable currents. We never got to dive any of them. And I think part of that was the safety concern on the part of the dive guides, that some of the divers just were not capable, and they didn't have the go ahead from the owner of the resort to operate the second boat. Another comment I had about Fiji, and I think this applies not just to our resort, but probably all the resorts and all the sites, there was very poor invertebrate life, much less than I've seen at most other tropical sites in the Pacific. So the best diving we did was at this place called Daku Niva. That was the best dive. Saw some sharks, a lot of fish, really good healthy coral. There was another one called Giant Cabbage Patch, and that was kind of my tidal slide. That one was very impressive, like the size of a city block. They had a really awesome dive guide who I got to be friends with, and here he's feeding the anemone fish with his octopus, and they're attacking the bubbles, which I thought was pretty funny to see. I haven't seen that behavior before. They had free kayak usage, which we enjoyed. Hike to the Black Sand Beach, farm tour. This is like a vanilla plant hanging from one of the trees in the farm. The village tour my wife enjoyed. So there was some other good topside stuff. The worst diving, you know, they had a lot of problems with algae due to the, you know, coral bleaching killed off the coral, and then the algae took over. This is a part of the reef on Buna Reef that's been wiped out by Cyclone Winston. And so, you know, there's almost nothing remaining. I wasn't sure why they took us here. I recommended that they not bring other divers back for at least a few more years until this recovers more from the cyclone. And then they took us to, you know, one of the things that the most famous dive site is called the Great White Wall. And I think they took us there at a really bad time, maybe just because it was somebody else's last day. And so all the polyps were retracted. It was dark, not an enjoyable dive at all. So these are some of, if for those of you who do get to visit, these are some of the most famous sites. These are less protected, and they were pointing this out to me as we were riding by, and they told me we'd be very happy to take you there, but there are other people on the boat. We're not comfortable taking to these sites. And they said, watch the current going whipping around. these more exposed parts of Rainbow Reef. So Rainbow's End, Jerry's Jelly, Barracuda Hole, these are some of the most famous sites. Unfortunately, we never really got to see them. I don't really feel qualified to comment on how good Rainbow Reef can be if you get to these sites. This is what we got to watch on the TV. They would show promotional videos of here's the great diving you're going to see, and I think the people who came with the dive club at the start of the week we were there probably did get to see these, but we didn't have the luxury of having a dedicated boat with only experienced divers, so we never did get to see them. So what I liked and disliked about the resorts, the resort that, you know, the social part was like one of the best I've ever seen. Interesting other guests. It had nice grounds. The accommodations were great. Food was great. Senior dive staff's as good as I've seen. The best 20% of the dives we went on were pretty good, and everything for sale was reasonably priced. There was no like remote location markup. The dislikes were, you know, one boat, cattle boat diving most days. They only had one other boat available, and you know, they only used it as a backup or for private charters. Many of the dives were poor, bleached coral, few invertebrates, limited fish life. Destinations were based on the capabilities of the least capable divers on the boat, and no afternoon dives to save money on gas and labor, except for shore dives. Um, so so I was not satisfied with the vacation part of the trip was a success. The dive trip part was a disappointment, and I didn't feel like I got my money's worth. So sort of set out, okay, what am I going to do different next time to make sure this doesn't happen again? This is the first time I've ever done cattle boat diving in, you know, 420 plus log dives. How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? So and this is where I'm really eager to hear, you know, what other people in the club also recommend. But you know, one of the things I think you have to ask is the diving around the resort challenging? I mean, this was one of the questions I was asking Mackenzie as well. And in the case of Fiji, the answer is definitely yes. And in fact, many places, Cozumel, yes. Palau, yes. This is true. A lot of places, not true every place. There's some Bonaire, the answer is no. They're right. There's very little challenging diving in Bonaire. So, but if the answer is yes, who do they just how do they decide who's going on the beginner boat, who goes on the boat to the, you know, more desirable places that might be more challenging? And so, you know, one of the metrics I want to look for, like I told them in the feedback that the form that they gave, they really need to have 3 or 4 boats. They need to run a minimum of 2 boats. At which every other resort I've been to would do. They shouldn't be running, you know, 14 to 18 people. You know, they should be running ideally 6 to 8 and 10 max. They should segregate into at least 2 groups, you know, and have people with different interests and different capabilities on different boats. And then, you know, another question is what happens if only a few advanced divers are present? You know, well-run places really care about getting you to the best diving they have, and they really want you to see it, and they'll spend the extra money and the extra fuel getting you there. Places that are more about the bottom line, which I think mine qualified at, you know, they don't. You know, maybe they're not going to worry about that. So and then I do plan to spend, you know, I spent less than an hour reading reviews online. I definitely won't make that mistake again. And I think reviews from places like Undercurrents, where you have to pay to get in, are probably more likely to give you honest information than, you know, places that are carefully, like TripAdvisor, where it's carefully watched by the owners, and they're going to rebut everything that's not a 5-star review and try to explain it away. I think, you know, if there are options to, like a fallback option, if they're not getting you where you want to be able to get a custom charter, and if so, is that reasonable in cost? In my case, they didn't have enough boats to really do that anyway, and it would have been very expensive. So they told one of the people, well, if you don't like our diving, you can hire your own boat. And, of course, it was like hundreds and hundreds of dollars per day or something. That didn't really seem like a very customer oriented way. And you can also ask, how likely are you over the course of a week to be able to visit specific dive sites if they're ones that matter to you? So one of the other divers who was with us our week actually had it set up. It was very interesting. That the Boli Voli and the one we went to on Tavioni were the two that they mentioned, and she actually did both. And so and she loved Boli Boli. She gave it high praise. She ranked it with Raja Ampat, which many people would consider, some of the best in the world, and says she's definitely planning on going back. So, we'd like to check it out as well. And we may also stay at one of the other resorts further north on Taviuni or right across from Rainbow Reef on Vanu Levu. So something worth trying. Hope we get to go back to Fiji. So in summary, our first family dive vacation with all three of us diving was a total success as a vacation, and it's a tropical resort. As a dive trip, it was a disappointment. Can't really tell you whether Rainbow Reef is worth a visit or not, since I haven't seen any of the really famous sites on it. And it was the first and hopefully only time I've ever done cattle boat diving. It's great to save time using a dive travel agent, but in my case, it was risky, and you don't need to have, you need to have somebody you can really trust. So my lesson learned was I won't be outsourcing quite as much of the responsibility in the future, at least until I develop a relationship where I trust the travel agent more.
Hey,
So
Bob,
yeah,
when you got back and relayed kind of this to that travel agent, what
yes.
did they say? Because I mean, they were
So
like, "Oh, it's the perfect place, and it'll be great." And this doesn't sound good.
Right. So I sent them this, and I literally got no response whatsoever. They did not didn't even acknowledge receipt of my email. I at least expected like, wow, I'm sorry, or but instead, like, absolutely nothing. So I was disappointed in that regard as well. So at this point, I'd really like to open it up, and I think other people have more experience than I do, especially recently in setting up trips, and I'd love to hear what best practices are for other people, how they pick resorts, and how you get someplace that's gonna, take you to the best places and not just, take you on cattle boat diving. I'd love to hear other, hoping to get a conversation started. Or if nothing else, I know Jane, I know you were interested in Fiji. Do you have questions about any of the slides I showed earlier about the diving in Fiji?
Yeah, it's been so long since I was there. I
Mhm.
I actually I'm not interested in the shark diving, and one of the places suggested was, Baca, and I want to see the soft corals because that's what I remember the most
Mhm.
about Fiji underwater.
Yeah. So of the 4 places you sent me, the one Dua Dua Resort is up right on the same peninsula as Voli Voli.
Oh,
So
okay.
Voli Voli or Dua Dua, those would both be ones that would go out here to the Flywater, and or be diving some of these other little islets. So those would probably be your best bet for the
Okay.
trip that you're interested in setting up.
All right, thanks. That was the most expensive for only 3 days of diving. So it's like,
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to say 3 days, unless you're just stopping. I hope you're not just going there and coming right back. So
no,
it's on the way to someplace else.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's what I figured. Yeah,
So yeah, it's like, oh, it's so close, I should go because I haven't been in a long time. But
right,
a
right.
lot of your report is disheartening.
Yeah,
And I would be by myself, so it's a little harder not to get
yeah.
on a paddle boat.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that's a problem, so even the volley, like what they describe is like the first day they don't really trust you, and so they
Right.
take you out to some very mild place, and then, if they like what they see, then the second or the third day they'll take you out to better places, and so you still have to like prove yourself to them,
Yeah.
at the start, and so that's another potential problem unless you're traveling with like a dive club where everybody's kind of a known quantity.
So I gotta say, I think that kind of approach is what most, places are gonna do. I mean, because
Sure.
people show up and they have no idea. And in Fiji, I mean, those are the strongest currents I've ever swum in, in my diving career. And so if they've got people who aren't up to it, I mean, they need to know that before, like, drop them in the water and off they go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say it's been a while since I've been in Fiji, maybe almost 10 years, but I did stay at Voli, and the soft coral up there was really amazing.
Okay.
Tons of it and beautiful colors. I don't know if any of it's been impacted by cyclones, warming, what have you in the interim, but it was amazing up there, when I was there.
Okay. Yeah, my contact didn't said that the diving was awesome where she went, and didn't really see any evidence of the cyclone there, evidently.
Specialize in dive travel?
Sorry, I missed this. So sorry, who are you recommending, Linda?
No, well, I was just going to ask, did your travel agent specialize in dive travel?
Yes, this was a specialized dive travel agent, which I no longer would recommend. Yeah.
Okay, there used to be a club sponsor for NCUPS called Worldwide Dive and Sail. I don't know if they go by the same name, but
okay.
Can anyone else put in their 2 cents about what that company, if that's still around or if it's under another name?
So Worldwide Dive and Sail, Siren Fleet, and now I think it's Master. I have been on Siren boats before, but I would not recommend it.
Okay.
I've been on a couple and I was quite pleased. One was in the Philippines.
So Linda, you're doing a lot of planning. I mean, will you spend like hours and hours on scuba board? I mean, how are you picking which dive operations you're going to use?
I pretty much go with always a liveaboard.
Okay.
And with like Blue Water, I think they're called Blue Water Dive Travel, organizes a lot of trips.
Yeah.
And they're usually pretty good and pretty well organized. So I guess to find the more well-used travel agents and go with them.
Yeah.
You didn't mention the name of the one you chose.
I will mention it after Paul finishes the recording. But
okay.
I don't want this to be on the
I understand.
channel. Yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to add my 2 cents. I was in Fiji about 20 years ago when I was on the Aggressor. And the reason why I chose Fiji, because I was in New York and I went to the Museum of Natural History, and they had a presentation as Fiji being the soft coral capital of the world. And on the Aggressor, there wasn't a lot of people on the boat. We had a shark dive. We had fantastic corals. We went to a carnival ceremony. I had a beautiful trip. I'm going back in October, and I'm going through Blue Water. I'm going with a guy who's done a presentation for NCUPS Nirpam.
Oh yeah.
And he's aware.
Mark Strickland?
Not Mark Strickland, but Nirpam.
Okay.
I do know Mark too, but
okay.
It's a photography class, and Nirpam's a really good teacher. I expect the same quality of diving at at this resort that we're going to. And I don't remember the name of it offhand right now. I just got home.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm sorry you didn't have such a great time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Blue Water Travel, and I've been using them for my
Okay.
trip.
Mhm.
I can say nothing but good things.
Okay.
When I left
I
Dumaguete,
agree.
Philippine Airlines canceled my return flight with no setup for the next flight. And
Mhm.
I called Blue Water Travel, and
Mhm.
the woman that I've been dealing with, she pretended she was me and gave them a tongue lashing, got a refund for the flight home, and then they helped me get a flight on Eva Airlines, and I went through Taipei back to San Francisco. So Blue Water Travel is a very good organization to use, just from my experience.
Mine
Okay.
too.
Good to know.
Okay. So Paul, in your case, what are your recommendations in terms of this choosing resorts?
So I like Lisa's approach too, which is to find a group, workshop or organized trip or something like that,
Yeah.
where it's all a bunch of photographers,
Mhm.
because then you have a kind of singleness of purpose, and everybody is kind of trying to do. I mean, you may not be trying to shoot exactly the same thing, but you're all out
Yeah.
there trying to shoot. It's
Yeah.
not like, to your point, you're on a cattle boat with
Yeah.
people who are just like trying to swim as fast as they can from one thing to the next,
Right.
while
Right.
you're trying to get a shot, and
Yeah.
everybody's getting stretched out. And I think that if you are on kind of a dive trip like that, they're going to have picked a place that where there will be good photo opportunities, and where it's not just going to be like barren substrate and kind of nothing to see.
Or rough currents.
I'm sorry?
Or rough currents. You can't take pictures in rough currents.
Yeah, it's hard to loop back or just do grab shots if you're diving in heavy current all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you want at least some current some of the time, because
Sure.
you want
Sure.
the corals to kind of come out, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the fish to kind of line up in their schools. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm willing to fight some current for a picture.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to be swimming in like crazy current all the time. That's no fun. But anyway, I think that's been my approach. So, I mean, we've had a number of people present at NCUPS. Like Brooke Peterson does trips to Antelope, I know, and maybe some other places.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Alex Mustard and his trips.
Yeah.
I used to be a fan of some of the Wet Pixel trips, although Wet Pixel kind of different situation. And I've been on trips that Tony Wu's organized in the past to go see whales in Tonga. That was amazing. So I think, to me, that's kind of a higher kind of hit rate way to go than just like call up the travel agent and say,
sure,
I want to go to X, or
yeah.
what specials do you have now?
Yeah. No, the backscatter trips were really good too, in terms of like, I mean, they really, they're used to very experienced high level divers when you go on those trips. So that, I guess that would be another possibility. And I know they do over, at least half a dozen trips a year. So that I guess would be another place to look at.
Robert, while people are talking, can you scroll backwards? I lost the internet connection for a few minutes. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, where did you want to go? What slide did you want to look at?
It was before that wavy temperature graph of Fiji, but I was offline, so I can't tell you what it was.
I see. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Like this one, you mean? Like how you get to Fiji, or like it's
After
about
that.
11 hours. Oh, okay. After that. Okay. Oh, I think, yeah, this is all, you may not have missed it. Just these slides. One on best time of year to go, which is summer. it's slightly more optimal to go in quarter or three-quarter moon when the tides are a little less intense.
And the
But,
currents.
yeah, and the currents, right? But yeah, it may not be like a deal killer, or it may not make that much of a difference.
Well,
So,
what's the one after this?
and then some of the stuff on Taviuni, Luna Reef, Rainbow Reef. I think
Right.
sure. Yeah. Hopefully we can get somebody who's like a more serious Fiji expert.
Are there other questions for either
Yeah.
Bob or Mackenzie?
I have a couple of comments. We have been to Fiji 2 times.
Okay.
I was looking, the first time was in March. It was
Okay.
back in 2009, and we went
Yeah.
out. We, thanks to NCUPS, Fred
Mhm.
Hyman had won yet another prize, and it was a trip
Yeah.
on the Naya.
Yeah.
And he had people, anyway, we went on the Naya, and it was great diving and
Okay.
up in that Blywater area.
Yeah.
And good weather. And the other
Yeah.
time we went was in 2018 in October
Okay.
with the Marin Scuba Club.
Okay.
And we stayed at Voli Voli. We
Okay.
arrived in a driving rainstorm.
Yeah.
It had bad weather most of the time we were there.
Right.
I remember threading our way between huge coral heads in murky
Mhm.
water because of the runoff.
Mm,
It
yeah.
was, the resort was okay, but
Did you, sorry, and that time that you went in October, was any of the diving good, or was you had very poor
well,
visibility
it
the whole
was,
time?
there was sometimes good diving and there was sometimes murky, and sometimes
Yeah.
there was one last dive when we were close. There was like a big bombing and the
Mhm.
current kicked up, and
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
ended up, all the divers were strung along a
Mhm.
line behind the boat, gradually getting
Mhm.
on board and trying not to
Mhm.
run into each other's tanks. But
Mhm.
that was it was a stormy time. So
Okay, so
maybe I
let
should,
me just repeat the
maybe I should go in the
recommendations.
good
Yeah.
months next time.
Yeah, so let me repeat the recommendations. Okay, so Fiji has more land area than a lot of other places. Like Palau, you're never ever going to get, tons and tons of runoff, or Bonaire, right?
Mhm.
It's just not going to happen. But with Fiji, if you're not going in what are our summer months, you've got a risk of very poor visibility. And if you go to the scuba board reviews, you'll see that show up. Especially if you take your chances and you're going in, the winter months, or even in our case, we went toward the end of the winter in March, and so it's definitely a risk, and people should be aware of that and plan accordingly.
I have a question about
Yeah.
recommendations for fins
Mm,
because it's so hard to take heavy stuff now on planes.
yeah.
And I know the currents are strong. I mean, in the past when I went, I just had some pool fins and they did
Yeah.
as well as Ben's fins. So when we got caught in a big current,
Mm,
but I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts about that.
I think your local dive shop would be your best source because they're gonna tailor what they choose for you versus someone else. But that's just my
yeah.
thoughts.
Okay.
I mean, how big are your fins? Like decent size, or are they like really small, kind of travel size fins?
Oh, I just have, Monterey heavy duty fins.
Okay.
So I don't
Okay.
want to take those. I
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have some warm water stuff that, I've been taking to
Mhm.
Cozumel,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's probably okay.
Yeah. Probably is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most of them are going to be okay. I mean, there might be some type. I'm not an expert. I mean, there may be some fins that are like too small or not adequate. I will say the dive guides all there use super long fins, but
Oh,
it sounds like that's not what you want to travel with anyway.
no,
What they
Yeah.
use are the free diving fins.
Exactly, that's what they're using. Yeah,
Yeah,
all
we
the
don't-
dive
we don't want
guides use those. Yeah,
I've got some of those and I can't use them anymore, so
yeah, yeah. Okay.
hamstring.
All right. Any other last minute suggestions before we go on to the mini comp? All right. If not, thank you very much, and I will stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. That was great. And also I did put my email in the chat, so for anyone that had questions for Wakatobi, feel free to email me. Glad to help as I can. So with that, I think we'll get over to mini comps. And Paul, do you have it?
By the way, do
queued
you
up?
want to stop the recording, Paul? Now that we're at the end of the presentation part?
Yes, I will do that.